Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be a bit different kind of approach to an endgame content discussion, and we're going to be talking about which champions I basically use most and which champions I hardly use at all and for what reasons. So from your day-to-day kind of needs, right, you can split your champions more or less in kind of like three groups. One is a group that you use for alliance war, defense and offense. One is alliance quest. And the third group is who do you use for questing in like your uncollected or like your general casual kind of stuff, assuming you have kind of like you are on top of all of the big content. And then if you will, you have like the fourth group, which you use for whatever big new content comes out, like a new variant or new chapter in Act 6 or so on and so forth. So we can start with Alliance War Defense. Now my Alliance War Defense isn't kind of like anything too spectacular or special. Quite a few of them are actually kind of like diversity placements, because I'm in a quite big alliance and we pretty much have most of the champions in game that are needed ranked up, and yeah, it doesn't like really leave you with much of a need specifically or something. So I do have Modok, which was ranked primarily for defense. Obviously he does go on defense currently as well. I do actually place my Cull Obsidian on defense. It's kind of like a diversity placement. I do also place my rank 2 Wasp on defense. She's also a fairly solid defender. Medusa goes on defense, and Mr. Fantastic, because of his like weight and the fact that he is a quite new champion. So those would be kind of like my more or less semi-permanent defenders, even though they kind of change here and there. Sometimes Sentinel goes on defense, sometimes Sabertooth goes on defense, and they kind of switch about now and then. But when it comes to Alliance War Attack, pretty much everything revolves around Quake. Quake is by far my most dominant Alliance War attacker. I take Path 4 in Section 1, and typically you get greeted by Domino of the go, and that is quite a hard fight already. And with Black Widow synergy, she's able to absolutely destroy that fight quite easily, as well as take care of most of the mini bosses. And my Section 2 is typically like Path 5 or 6 or 4 or one of those, somewhere in the middle. She pretty much handles all or most of it. And as I mentioned before, since I do typically get to Quake at least 1 to 2 dominoes per war, that also means that I have to bring in Black Widow synergy. And the third spot most commonly gets taken by Nick Fury, because A, he brings more attack for Quake as well, and B, he is a fantastic champion himself. He can absolutely destroy some of the Alliance War bosses like Invisible Woman. He can absolutely tear through, or some of the other champions that we can see being placed on the boss nodes. And since I do get to kill the bosses quite often, depending who is on the boss node, instead of Nick Fury, I might have to bring in Hyperion, because Hyperion absolutely destroys Guillotine 2099 and Warlock. So that is who I bring when we see one of those bosses. And occasionally I also have to bring in Captain America Infinity War if I see somebody somewhat annoying on Path 4 other than Domino, because on the first fight he can absolutely destroy that whole unstoppable shindig that have going on, and with skill synergy as well, kind of like just works out quite well, especially if there's something like Void. So Captain America Infinity War has seen a couple of wars, and couple of wars went also to Warlock when I had to deal with some of the more pesky mutants, typically like either Havoc or Mr. Sinister or Sabertooth somewhere. So those are basically the only champions I think I have brought in this season. And yeah, I don't really get or have to use much more than that, just because of how much Quake can do by herself. That is also like a large reason why I haven't uploaded much of Alliance War footage, because a lot of them are extremely similar, where I'm going to use Quake for 7 fights out of 8 or 9 fights out of 10, and then the one fight, which typically is probably going to be the boss fight or something along the way, is going to be taken down by some other champion. And yeah, so I have kind of dropped uploading Alliance Wars just because of how frequently I use Quake. But at the same time, I absolutely love it. It makes kind of like very easy, stable Alliance War clearing. Not many surprises there. and the playstyle is something I'm very comfortable with, and I absolutely love my quick. That being said, we are left with Alliance Quest. Now, the Alliance Quest, obviously we have all of these variables that change from week to week. We have different paths, we have different champions, we have different nodes, we have different attack boosts and penalties, we have different modifiers. So I do change up my Alliance Quest champions quite a bit. The one kind of probably most permanent and most frequently used champion in Alliance Quest for me probably is Night Thrasher, just because he kind of fits really well for most of the paths that I have to tackle. He can deal with Spider-Mans in section 1 if I have to, if that is the week that they are on. He can deal with Freezer Burn and Incinerate lanes in section 2, even Can't Stop, Won't Stop, because once he's ramped up, he does throw a lot of damage out there, and he can still kind of like get through the lanes with his 25% of the damage on Can't Stop, Won't Stop. And section 3, he's buffed up quite often, and he has access to 10 Fury buffs, which covers that perfectly. And even if it's tunnel vision, he's fairly easy to use against those nodes too. So he normally kind of like fits my needs for IQ for most part, and he is a fairly big staple. And then everything else kind of gets changed around depending on what week it is, who gets attack penalty, who I kind of need to use. Like Silver Surfer is quite good for me at the moment as well if I have to deal with Incinerate or Freezer Burn lane, and I have buffed up in section 3. So he kind of like ticks 2 of the 3 sections in IQ map by himself quite easily, so he gets to see some play. Then currently I'm testing out Black Widow Clairvoyant, because she's really good at dealing with Footloose by being able to nullify the opponent's Unstoppable and Evade buffs, or giving them buff immunity so they don't even get the Unstoppable and Evade to begin with. And this week was Mystic Week, so she did absolutely fantastic for me in section 1. Now, the only 2 champions that I do still end up using on semi-serious content, that is map 7 IQ, that are not rank 5, are Colossus, because Colossus again has the Incinerate and Cold Snap immunity, so he can deal with Freezer Burn and Incinerate lanes. In section 2, he has the 3 buffs active on him from beginning of the fight, so he can deal with buffed up. Also, if it's a tunnel vision there, then his playstyle kind of like parry heavy supports it really well, and he can deal with tunnel vision. So he definitely is putting in some solid work there. And the other champion that I still end up using as a rank 4 now and then is Venom, because if there is a Spider-Man lane, then you can just bring in Venom and everything's kind of going to be alright. He can completely shut down all of the waves, has good damage output, and even at rank 4 he's proving that he's kind of like more than enough. Additionally, with being able to deal with Spider-Mans, he also has a lot of buffs naturally by himself, and he can deal with buffed up and stuff like that. So that is one of the things that I like. I like to take in champions that can cover at least 2 of the 3 sections of the map, and then everything else is kind of going to be what happens will happen. One of the champions that quite often I like to bring to IQ, more so probably than most others, is Hyperion, because Hyperion, again, he kind of like fits in many different roles. He's sustainable, he has that regen. You can use him on different needs or sections. You can use him for Footloose, for instance, and just spam level 1s. Opponents barely ever get their special attacks off, and with that you kind of like prevent them from going unstoppable and being able to wade much, because most of the time the fight is over in a couple of special attacks at the same time. Spam a couple of heavies, he can do buffed up. If you really have to, you can also get through Freezer Burn or Incinerate lane, especially by triggering that regen, kind of regenerating something back. And he is a champion that's capable of dealing with Omega Red mini bosses and putting up a lot of damage against Thanos. Another champion is Dr. Doom. I like to bring him in if a Nihilus mini boss is there, because he can absolutely destroy that. But again, that is all kind of like switching and changing about. So these would be kind of like my most used daily champions for AQ, AW. When it would come to the third group, which would be kind of like casual questing and clearing out your regular day-to-day content. I do most of it on streams, to be honest, and I hardly ever get to use my fully ranked up champions, and I do it with my rank 3s or 4 stars only, and I hardly ever use these champions outside of AQ or AW daily. So that leaves us with a huge chunk of champions who actually hardly ever see much play, unfortunately. Now that is not a direct kind of like testament that they're not necessarily useful. It's just the fact that each player's like needs at any given moment can be extremely subjective and different depending on what lanes in AQ you do, what lanes in AW you do, and this is kind of like my personal example, but realistically, Warlock, Dr. Doom, Phoenix, Namor, Captain Marvel, Mr. Fantastic, Goldpool, Corvus, Sabretooth, Thor Ragnarok, Blade, Aegon, Captain America, Medusa, Sentinel, Omega Red, Ghost, Cull Obsidian, Havoc, Magic, Wasp, Emma Frost, Human Torch, and Guillotine 2099 don't really see that much game time. Like, I hardly ever use them, but there is like that fourth category, right, when it comes to tackling biggest and baddest content that Kabam is releasing, which is Act 6 chapters, which is variants, so on and so forth. And then obviously you bring in your kind of like powerhouse champions. Typically, quite often for me, it's Nick Fury, Quake, Captain Marvel movie, Goldpool, and then Ghost or somebody else. I do not often run Ghost with the full synergy team. I like to play Ghost just by herself. And then obviously, depending on the lanes, you can switch it up. Warlock has been insanely useful for a lot of the latest content. Dr. Doom has his strong sides. Namor, when the need calls for him, obviously he's like a godsend gift. Corvus still can put in some serious work. Goldpool actually gets used more than most because he's always there for the synergy with Nick Fury. Sabretooth I honestly hardly ever use, and that kind of like led me to making this video. I do not want and will not to kind of like talk trash about these champions because there are good reasons why I did rank them up, what I did rank them up for, and why I did it basically. But at the same time, I just wanted to make like an honest video of which champions I don't really use. And now that we have gotten through everything out of the way, the champions that I hardly ever use, and this is me being like absolutely honest, is Phoenix, only kind of like as a showpiece really, when I'm trying to prove a point or something sort of fun in dungeons. Namor does get used, but that's like for 2 lanes out of, I don't know, 50, right? I don't use him at all daily, neither in AQ, neither in AW, and for the latest act and chapter content, it's kind of like, yeah, if that lane kind of absolutely demands Namor, then I do have to use him, obviously, because he can cheese some of the stuff really well, like Torn's lanes and stuff like that. But at the same point, he's not the champion you're going to be using as your main lane clearer. So I knew that at the time I was ranking him up and I was fully expecting him, and I just wanted to also kind of like say that that is how it is, that is how it worked out for me. It doesn't see much gameplay, but when he does come into the game, he actually provides the value that I rank him up for. Now, Captain Marvel does put in some work. In 6.3, I think it was definitely less than 6.2 because the health pools got a bit too big and it was a bit harder to use her. And the lanes were quite specific, but I didn't use her too much in 6.3. I did use her a fair bit, I think, in 6.2 though. Mr. Fantastic, don't think well, he's a new rank up relatively, and I haven't really used him in any of the difficult content. Goldpool, by happenstance, has proven himself to be extremely useful. Definitely use that guy. Corvus Glaive has seen a huge decrease in his usage recently. That is something to keep in mind, because he just doesn't get used too much anymore. Sabretooth I have never really used much. Thor Ragnarok has hardly ever entered any serious quest, maybe once or twice, but no, have never really used that guy. Blade pretty much never anymore. Like honestly, no, don't. I just don't find the need or space or whatever. Now, Aegon does put in a lot of work. Aegon definitely puts in a lot of work in 6.2, 6.3, and some other areas of the game where the necessity arises, you could say. He is one champion that is always there, that I always can count on, and I do put him on my teams quite often. He also synergizes my base core of Quake, Nick Fury, and Goldpool really well. And yeah, I love that guy. Use him quite a bit. Captain America Infinity War, use him fair amount. Obviously, I'm not going to talk Night Rush and Nick Fury again. I mentioned those already. Medusa, hardly ever. Sentinel, surprisingly, I've used him in pretty much every single piece of content. Starting from first variant, I believe, and first chapter of Act 6. Ever since I ranked him up, even though I hate the guy, he somehow always becomes useful. And that is the one thing about him. I don't like him, but he definitely sees plenty of play. Omega Red, I'll be honest, I don't use him too much either. Use him here and there, but I probably will say I'm not the best Omega Red player, or I don't really enjoy that playstyle too much either. And yeah, no. Also, I think one thing that I definitely did notice in 6.3 is that he was struggling quite a bit more with larger health pool opponents. He was like really hard to use, and I'm kind of like growing less and less fond of this guy. Still a fantastic champion. He's just never really served any meaningful purpose or relieved me of any kind of like real stress, I suppose. So yeah, not the biggest fan of this guy. That Ghost obviously sees all of the gameplay ever whenever anything difficult comes in. It's one of your go-to champions alongside with Quake. MODOK, never. Call Obsidian, pretty much never outside of variant 2. Quake, always, everything, everywhere. Quake is like, I don't know, a duct tape, basically. If you can't deal with something, then you can just Quake it. She's insanely useful. My best champion in the game, probably. Havoc is a brand new rank up, so I'm not going to comment on that because I have just freshly ranked him up. Nick Fury 5-star. Will I use 2 Nick Furies at the same time? Probably no, but as I said, Nick Fury gets a lot of AW play and sometimes IQ play, so I'm happy to have 2. Magic has seen huge decrease in usage for sure. Black Widow, once again, is quite new rank up. I'm sure I will use her just because she's suicide friendly and doesn't require any kind of special setup or synergies, so I'm sure there will be some use there. Wasp does see some play. When I have some trickier fights with Ghost, I bring her in for synergy, as well as Wasp has turned out to be one of the kind of like low-key answers for some of the problem fights, like that Mordo in 625, and some of the stuff when you kind of like rely on Ghost a lot, then Wasp just kind of swoops in and takes whatever Ghost wouldn't want to, in cases like, I don't know, Ebony Maw or some other matchups. Wasp's actually like really solid, do like her a lot, and she gets more play than most. Emma Frost, unfortunately, hardly ever gets any playtime. Hyperion gets a lot of the game time. Human Torch, again, he's a niche champion. He's kind of like a Namor. When there is something he can do, he does it extremely well, and I'm happy for that, and that's the reason why he's ranked up. I would never expect him to put in kind of like a lot of work day to day, and that is what exactly he's doing. So he does see some game time, which is exactly what I kind of was looking for when I ranked him up. And Guillotine 2099, also a fairly fresh rank up, but hasn't really been used in pretty much any of the content, although I definitely have seen places where she would excel. And now again, like the only champion below that, on a side of the rank 4s that I mentioned before of Colossus and Venom, is Void, that still sees some gameplay and game time, because obviously when it comes to dealing with some crazy healing, then he's a great option alongside Captain America Infinity War. So he does see some game time. So actually, now that I'm talking to myself, I kind of realized that my next 3 rank ups probably should be Void, Colossus, and Venom. But we'll see who I actually pick to rank up. But that would kind of make most sense because those champions actually get to see plenty of kind of game time. But yeah, so unfortunately, that's a kind of like simple truth that at this point, where I have about 30 champions ranked up to the highest of the level in the game, that's pretty much possible right now, outside of the magic few rank 3 6 stars, is the fact that realistically, more than half of them don't really see the game time. For vast majority of the stuff, when you have Aegon, Quake, Ghost, Goldpool, Nick Fury, like those 5 champions, and then you kind of switch something out for Warlock or Doctor Doom or Namor, as in when you need, or Captain America Infinity War, that's pretty much all that has been necessary. And like, if I would be an up-and-coming player, I wish somebody had like kind of passed down me that piece of advice. So like, don't focus on the rest of the things that seem cool, do a lot, but realistically you might not end up using them at all. Like Call Obsidian hasn't definitely earned back his catalyst. At the same time, I don't particularly regret ranking him up because I already had everything I needed. You have to rank something up, and I knew where I'm getting, and just hopefully that he is gonna come through in some piece of content in future. And yeah, because there is that kind of fairly privileged state where you can rank up a bunch of champions that you will not necessarily use all of the time, but that do fill in important niches of the game. And that is also one of the goals that I currently have whilst ranking up champions like Namor. As I mentioned, don't use him at all day to day, but when I have to, it's good to have him. Same would go for Human Torch. Same would probably go for Guillotine 2099. But at the same time, there are just so many champs that get ranked, are great on paper, but I hardly ever use. The best example probably would be Omega Red, because he's such a dominant champion, present, everybody's praising him, and you can kind of see why. At the same time, when you have the choice in between everything else in the game, there's nothing I really need him for, or nothing I like to rely on him for. So I think that will pretty much do for today's video. This is a bit of a weird one, but at the same time, I thought it would be kind of interesting for people to see the perspective of how endgame players, at least myself, I actually look at my account and what I find useful, what I don't find useful, what I'm happy with, what I'm kind of like indifferent about. And yeah, if I have to kind of like pick 10 champions that I use constantly, it'll be Nick Fury, Quake, that are 10 most important champions for my account. So 10 most important champions for my account currently would be Quake, Ghost, Nick Fury, Aegon, Night Thrasher. That's 5. I'm pretty much kind of like settled there. I don't want, yeah, that's pretty much all the 5 that there is that do most of the heavy lifting. That would be, yeah, Quake, Ghost, Nick Fury, Aegon, top 4. 5, Night Thrasher does a lot of lifting, I have to admit, and that pretty much kind of like does it, really. Yeah, so this is a different video. Let me know what you guys think anyways, especially if you have larger accounts. Do you try to use all of your champions? Do you have a lot of champions that you can kind of have ranked up and just don't use ever really much? Or what do you think about this kind of like whole situation? What is needed? What is excess? What should be the best rank ups? Because I think it's a fairly interesting thing to debate. Either way, that will do for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit all the buttons. I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya.